Well, for those of you who have been on Facebook with us, you've heard this song several times of the In Silence We Wait. We hope that you enjoy the music, and those who are here in person, we will hear the songs in our head, and I'll at least play the words. The hardest part is that I cannot hear the music, so I cannot time the words to what you hear. So I believe tonight we may just listen to the music that you can hear, and the people who are here will get to read the words because I am out of ideas. So let us begin our our Easter Vigil worship. For those of you who've heard, I've already played the song that you heard Pastor Matt record that says, "In silence we wait, in darkness you come to us. Bring us your light, and I will add your peace and your patience in the midst of this unusual and somewhat frustrating year." "24 hours. It has been 24 hours since my outburst last night. Sorry about that. But it was all just a little too much. It's still all a little too much, but I've had the whole Sabbath to think on it, to do nothing but think on it. In some ways, I'm glad that there was nothing else that I could do but think. And in other ways, the time just dragged on and on. But I've made it the first 24 hours without Jesus. I wasn't sure I'd be able to do that. 24 whole hours. Some of the other disciples were talking about what Jesus had said to them about his death. I wasn't usually there when he talked about that, and frankly, I didn't want to be there. I didn't want to think about his death, and I really hoped that that was a long way off. But they said that Jesus said that his death wasn't the end, that he'd meet them again, that he would rise in 3 days' time. I pray that's true. I mean, I know that he brought others back from the dead when he was alive. So maybe that's true. I have to trust that God has some plan for all of this, and that I just don't know what it is yet. That seems reasonable. I have spent the past 24 hours remembering the stories that I have been told about God. All my life, I have heard how that he has guided his people, that he has been there, and that the people living in the story didn't usually know how the story was going to end. So hopefully that's me, not knowing where the story will go from here. For instance, do you think that Adam and Eve knew what would happen to them? I doubt it. I mean, here God created the perfect world, right? Everything in balance, the day and the night, the water and the land, the sun and the moon, the creatures of the water and the land and the sky. And people to live and to walk and to breathe in God's image. God gave them every good thing. And even balanced immortal life, trusting in God, to mortal life, trusting in self. And yes, the serpent was sneaky and appealing and made some good points, but Adam and Eve are the ones who chose to think that what God had given them was not enough. That must have broken God's heart, that it wasn't enough, that every good thing wasn't enough. And that because of that, life had to change. His ideas had to change. His plan had to change. But still, God didn't abandon Adam and Eve. They were loved. They were cared for, just in a different way and in a different place. And though they didn't know it, God would make promises to their descendants to be with them and guide them. Adam and Eve didn't know the whole story, but God was still at work. Well, the next story that ran through my mind all today was one that I know we are all familiar with. When I mentioned it to the other disciples, all I had to get was as far as the name, Noah. And everybody nodded their head, knew the story, knew what I was talking about. Because Noah is the story we all tell when we need to be reminded of trusting God and relying on God instead of ourselves. Right? Am I right? You know the story of Noah. I'm sure that you know all about his faith and his willingness to do what God had asked him to do. He built an ark, a huge ark in the middle of a desert. And he trusted that God would lead him. And if you think about it, he had to live with the knowledge that he was only going to be able to save his family and a small part of creation. All the building that he did in his head, he knew that it was the end of the world, except for him and the people, the animals on the ark. It just I can't imagine how horrible life must have been around Noah for so few to be saved, because I know right now my life under the Roman occupation is not any day of sunshine all the time, but we're still here. But Noah did it. And he lived on that boat with his family and a whole lot of animals for 40 days and 40 nights. I love how the story says that, 40 days and 40 nights, as though if it was 40 days and 39 nights, it wouldn't have been that bad. But it's such a complete story, 40 days and 40 nights, and yet, I remember, right? That's really just the days it rained. He was on the boat for so much longer, waiting for the land to dry, for it to be safe to start over again. I can't believe he did that. But he did that. And because he did it, the bow appeared in the sky, and God made another promise to the people. Noah didn't know the whole story. But still, God was at work. Okay, so there are many stories that tell of God's promises. Adam and Eve, Noah, Abraham, Jacob, Joseph. But since it was just Passover, I can't help but look to Moses. I like Moses because he seems so unsure of himself. Unlike Noah, he didn't just agree and go on his way. He questioned and debated God. He needed help from his wife and his brother and his sister. He didn't think he was good enough to speak for God. But that didn't stop God from showing him otherwise. Poor Moses. having to face the very people he grew up with, to tell them the God of their slaves, his people, was about to change things. Poor Pharaoh, unable to give up an ounce of power over the people. Even as disaster rained down upon him, he couldn't let go. There was no way for that story to end well for both of them. But God freed the people. Can you imagine the sight of all of those people leaving Egypt with nothing but hope for a new life? How exciting, how terrifying. Especially terrifying when the Egyptians come after them. To see the waters part. To hear Miriam and the women singing. To feel like freedom may actually happen. In that moment, it must have been overwhelming. Then to see the waters crash down, the Egyptians swallowed, and to know that you are facing the unknown. To not know where you were going or how you were going to survive when you got there. But to just trust. I understand that. Moses and the Israelites didn't know the whole story. But God was still at work. You know, we could spend all night here recalling the stories of how God loves us and promises to be with us and to guide us. And I'm willing. I have nowhere to go, nowhere to be. I love the company. Want to stay all night? No, I know. Our hearts are heavy, and grief wears us down. So I won't keep you all night. But there are 3 of the prophets whose words and interactions with God pull at me tonight. I hope that their journeys are calling to me because God is trying to tell me something as well, to help me through my journey, my story. The first is the prophet Ezekiel. Now, a lot of Ezekiel is just strange to me. He talks a lot about God calling him mortal. Oh, mortal, mortal this, mortal that. And then God telling him to do strange things, or eat strange things, or say strange things. But there is one part toward the very end of the book where God takes Ezekiel to a valley of dry bones. Maybe you remember this story as well. The Lord again calls to Ezekiel and says to him, mortal, which has to be a little tough to hear when you are surrounded by the bones of other mortals. But he asks Ezekiel to prophesy to the bones, to speak to them, and to tell them that God will knit them together and breathe life into them. It's a ridiculous request. What does it matter if you speak to bones? But Ezekiel hears it, and he does it. And the bones knit themselves together. And God breathes in them and brings them back to life. I don't know what happened to them, but just the idea that God could breathe and reestablish life into dry bones gives me the spark of hope that Jesus could come back to us. Ezekiel believed. So perhaps if I believe, God will still be at work. Then there's Jonah. I have never liked Jonah. For a prophet, Jonah seems whiny and demanding and unreasonable. He complains about helping anyone but his people. His words change the heart of an entire city. But he still wants them punished. And he thinks that a bush withering is reason enough to die. He annoys me a lot. But he also reminds me of who I am versus who God is. Because if God asked me to speak to the Romans, to prophesy to the Romans, I'd be headed the other direction. I'd get angry. And if God wanted to ask me what to do with the chief priests right now, I'd have a few strong ideas, even if they apologized. And if he took away my source of comfort, my fellow disciples and those who I lean upon right now in this painful time, I would probably throw a fit too. I don't like Jonah, but I am like Jonah. Jonah isn't the greatest example of someone following and trusting in God. But he did eventually go to Nineveh. And the people did come to trust in God through his words and God's actions. Jonah was reluctant to believe, as I am reluctant to believe. But God is still at work. So I saved my favorite for last, and I have to stand up to tell you this one because it's great. I can almost tell it by heart, but there's just a little too much. But it's my favorite story from the prophet Daniel. Right? Daniel isn't in it at all, but he tells us the story. And it is my story for hope. Right? So I'm not going to give you all of the repetitions because it has a lot of repetitions. And if you've ever heard the story, you know it goes on and on. But it's such a powerful story. So it starts like this. King Nebuchadnezzar made a golden statue whose height was 60 cubits and width was 6 cubits. And he set it on the plain of Dura in Babylon. Then King Nebuchadnezzar sent for the satraps, the prefects, the governors, the counselors, the treasurers, the justices, the magistrates, and all of the officials of the provinces to assemble and to come to the dedication of the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up. So the satraps and the prefects and the so on and so on and so on all assembled at the dedication for the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. When they were standing before the statue that Nebuchadnezzar had set up, a herald proclaimed aloud, "You are commanded, O nations and languages and peoples, that when you hear the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, the trigon, the harp, the drum, and the entire musical ensemble, you are to fall down and worship the statue that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into the furnace of blazing fire. Therefore, as soon as all the peoples heard the sound of the horn, the pipe, the lyre, you get it, they worshiped the golden statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But accordingly, at that time, some Chaldeans came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the harp and the horn and the should fall down. And whoever does not fall down and worship the statue that you have set up shall be thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These pay no heed to you, O king. They do not serve your gods, and they do not worship the golden statue that you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar, in a furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought in. So they brought those before the king. Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, is it true that you do not serve my gods, and that you do not worship the golden statue that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn and the pipe, and you worship the statue that I have set up, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall be immediately thrown into a furnace of blazing fire. And who is the God that will deliver you out of my hands? Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to present a defense to you in this matter. If our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the furnace of blazing fire and out of your hand, O king, let him deliver us. But if not, know, O king, that we will never serve your gods, and we will never worship the golden statue that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar was so filled with rage against Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego that his face was distorted. And he ordered the furnace heated up 7 times more than customary. And he ordered some of the strongest guards in his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and to throw them into the furnace of blazing fire. So the men were bound, still wearing their tunics, their trousers, their hats, and their other garments. And they were thrown into the furnace of blazing fire. Now, because the king's command was urgent and the furnace was so overheated, the raging flames killed the men who lifted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. But the 3 men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down, bound into the furnace of blazing fire. Then King Nebuchadnezzar was astonished and rose up quickly. He said to his counselors, was it not 3 men that we threw bound into the fire? They answered the king, true, O king. He replied, but I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the middle of the fire, and they are not hurt. And the 4th has the appearance of a god. Nebuchadnezzar then approached the door of the furnace of blazing fire and said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out from the fire. And the satraps, the prefects, the governors, and the king's counselors gathered together and saw that the fire had not had any power over the bodies of those men. The hair on their head was not singed, their tunics were not burned, and not even the smell of fire came from them. Nebuchadnezzar said, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. They disobeyed the king's command and yielded up their bodies rather than serve and worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I make a decree. Any people, nation, or language that utters blasphemy against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb and their houses burned and laid in ruins. For there is no other God who is able to deliver in this way. That's my favorite. I'm not sure Nebuchadnezzar really gets it, right? Tearing limb to limb as opposed to a fiery furnace. But it's in that story that I see God in person, walking beside his people. 3 go in, but 4 are seen. Who could compare to the God who protects the people from fire and earthly powers? Surely the story of Jesus is not over. When he has been sent by that God who walked in the flames with Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego. God is still at work. I know it. I know God is still at work. There are so many stories we could share about God. And I thank you all for sharing this time with me. It has lifted my spirits with the promise that God is still working in this story. I should head to bed now because I'm going to get up at dawn. Some of the other women are planning to go to the tomb to finish anointing Jesus's body for burial. There wasn't time before the Sabbath began, and I hadn't planned to go with them. But now I think I must. I must go and trust and believe. I've heard that the chief priests asked Pilate to post guards at the tomb to make sure that none of us try to steal Jesus's body. But I hope they'll let us in to finish the burial rite. I guess there's nothing now to do but wait. Wait and hope and trust.